Hi, my name is Eliza. I'm a survivor advocate for those affected by human trafficking, and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm interviewing my first guest, and I'm so honored and pleased to have her with me today. Her name is Tara Reade. She is a poet. She is an author. She's a podcast host, and she's an activist, and she's a horse lover. And I'm just so excited to get an opportunity to speak with her today. Tara, welcome to my podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. And Eliza, I can't say how much of an honor it is to be your first guest. It was really wild when I got your invitation. I was so happy to get it. And, I followed you on Twitter for a while. I really admire all the work you do. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I was nervous to reach out. Just so folks have an idea, I guess I would call us acquaintances, but we weren't really friends before this. So I think It's awesome to get an opportunity to talk with a fellow survivor. And of course, I've followed your story for quite a while. And so I'm excited to unpack some of your story today. We had a great conversation beforehand, and I love your personality. And of course, whenever you watch folks through podcast interviews, you start to feel like you get to know them a little bit, but we didn't know each other. So I wanted to make that clear to folks. It wasn't like we were homies and this is me inviting my homie on. This is really an opportunity to talk with someone new. So when I was watching your interview with Megyn Kelly, I was really interested in a couple parts in you telling your story. Now, just so that folks know, you are a survivor of President Joe Biden. And if folks are interested in the details of Tara's story, she has a book out called Left Out When the Truth Does Not Fit. And so you can definitely check out her book. I would highly recommend it. And I believe that your story in that way is out in what I would consider pretty graphic detail. So we're not going to go over the very graphic details today. But while you were speaking with Megyn Kelly, one thing stood out to me right away as an advocate was that the fact that you are also a survivor of domestic violence. Would you mind just going into that relationship and a little bit of what that was like for you?
Yes, actually, the Megyn Kelly interview was really amazing. She's, it's really important, I think, for reporters to become trauma informed when they deal with these subject matters. And there are very few trauma informed reporters. I would consider Megyn Kelly one of them. I know some people criticized a little bit about that she went hard at me, but I told her that she could ask me anything she wanted. Otherwise, what was the point of me telling my story publicly? I also said I would answer all the questions that the critiques had. So she did her job and she did it well, but I still felt, as I was expressing what happened to me when I worked as a Senate staffer for Joe Biden, she still made me feel like I was in a safe place in that sense. She was coming at me with hard questions, but I also knew she herself had survived sexual harassment. Not just, and she understood what it was like to have powerful men pull at you, which we both have had that experience in our lives, or you as well. And so she has this unique perspective, but of course she had to come at me with some tough questions, and she did. So she asked me about the domestic violence because during my coming forward, the New York Times chose to expose every single aspect of my life, practically, even accidentally printing, they say it was accidental, my social security number, my congressional ID. They called my high school drama teacher, my high school boyfriend. Luckily, I'm still friends with my high school boyfriend, and he's a lovely man. So Cal was patient with it, but like the press wouldn't leave them alone. Like all my high school friends, like it was definitely intense. And so my life was just picked apart. And one of the things that came up was that I was a domestic violence survivor. And the way they framed it in some of the mainstream press was to class shame me and to shame me for being a single mother. They made remarks like, oh, She couldn't afford her law books, etc. And what I would say, going back to when I was assaulted, I was going out with my boyfriend, soon to be husband at that time. He worked on the Hill and was actually
So
working
really,
for.
sorry, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you say at the time that you were working for Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
Okay. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I was clear.
Yeah. I had just met my boyfriend, and he was very, he was, actively pursuing a relationship with me. And during that time is when I was sexually assaulted by Joe Biden. And I think, and this is just my opinion, had that event with Joe Biden not happened, I would not have ended up with him. But there's this thing in our culture, and I'm slightly older than you, so especially the way I grew up, it's, you look almost for a hero or someone to kind of rescue you in a sense at that time. That was the mindset kind of. And he made me feel safe, even though he was very controlling. He made me feel safe at that time, right when it happened, because I wasn't safe. It was a terrible situation. And then I kind of went from the, frying pan to the fire, right? Because as we, over the course of the months, and I was alone with him and living with him, he was very abusive. And to the point where the courts intervened after the birth of our child, and they intervened and his rights were terminated. And I was put into a program for safety that included a name change. And
I think, and I'm sorry, one of the things that I think was so important, to me, what's really stood out, that's for a survivor of domestic violence, would be what I would consider a more extreme case. When you're at the point where you are changing your name, and we see this as well with survivors of human trafficking as well, and in some cases sexual assault. When you're at the point where you're doing a name change, a social security number change, these are extreme, desperate measures to potentially save your life, because you see no other pathway forward. That's kind of why that stood out to me, Tara, was because you are someone that had gone to great lengths to maintain privacy from your abuser.
Yes.
That stood out to me so much when I heard your story, because to then later on in life step forward the way that you have, you had to come back out. So I want you to be able to finish that, but I do want to kind of go back to how pivotal and important that was.
It was. I mean, and to the point of what you're saying, I basically had to hide, and I'm a person who's not used to that, right? I was an actress before I went into politics, and a model. That's how I made my living. And so I was used to being, someone in public. So that was strange to have to live that way. It wasn't a decision I made personally. I was told to go into this program, and for the safety of my daughter and myself, I complied. It still bothers me that I'm the one who had to hide, and he's not the one that had to deal with his own behavior, if that makes sense. So, but we had to, do what we did, and we did. And I was lucky, actually. A lot of survivors of domestic violence don't get help. I was surrounded with help. And
when you say help, what exactly, if you don't mind breaking down, I don't want you to disclose, of course, anyone specifically that helped you, because I think it's important for advocates and folks that really, it's always a double-edged sword. You want to hype up organizations that do a good job, but on the flip side, you don't want to sort of increase the risk for other survivors or abusers attacking those organizations. So what did that help look like for you?
For me, well, actually, I was not even reporting what happened, and I was almost strangled to death is what happened. It was an attempted murder, and I was left unconscious, so he didn't call for help. He pled guilty and pled down to a misdemeanor. I went into work with bruises on my neck, and obviously I'd been beaten, and it wasn't the first time that they had seen it. I was working for Jack O'Connell, a state senator, and my coworker saw me and immediately said, "We're going to the DA's office." And first she said, "Let's go for a cup of coffee." And I said, "I'm not thirsty." And she said, "We're going for a cup of coffee." And then she took me to the DA's office, and I was really reluctant because I grew up in a household where you didn't call the police. They weren't necessarily helpful. And I just, coming from the background I come from, which is more like I'm more Irish Catholic, I guess, or whatever. You didn't go to the authorities for help. I mean, that's not something one does. You kind of solved your own problems, so to speak. And anyway, so what happened next was pretty pivotal in that they helped me get a restraining order. They helped us get safe. And then he kept his behavior up. And then his probation officer actually intervened and gave me a Tara-Soft warning, which is a Tara-Soft warning is when your life is in immediate danger. There's a plot to actually kill you. So he had apparently revealed how he was going to have me killed to someone in authority. And so they immediately swept in, meaning police, domestic violence advocates, and attorneys, and they relocated my daughter and me. And the courts just kind of pushed the case through as far as what had to happen to keep us safe. And so I'm forever grateful for them for that. How that played out with Joe Biden.
Survived too.
Yeah.
That's a really big deal.
Yeah, my daughter's an adult. She's very healthy. She's very happy. And she's
just so that we're clear, your daughter is with your ex that you're talking about now, correct?
My daughter, he lost custody.
Okay, he's the father,
custody.
But he lost custody.
He lost all parental rights. They terminated his parental rights in court, which is unusual. And then she recently got another restraining order against him because he was trying to contact her after I came forward and I was public. He tried it. It was hard for her and she felt she needed more safety. So the court gave her a lifetime restraining order against him. Good. So, yeah. So, we're safe. She's doing really well. I think the hard thing for me coming forward was the timing, right? When Joe Biden was vice president, I did not feel safe coming forward. I wouldn't come forward because my daughter was still in school, underage, and I was afraid of what happened to me last year would happen, right? In 2020. And so when I came forward in 2019, the first person I talked to was my daughter, Michaela. And, she was for me. She was worried. She said, he's too powerful. And then when she said that, I said, we can't let this generationally keep going. It's like generational abuse. She can't think that this man is so powerful. You have to keep silent. If she's in her 20s, I want your generation, I want my daughter's generation to have a different future.
Do you think that your experience of surviving the domestic violence relationship gave you some of the language to put to your experience and maybe a little bit of the strength in speaking out about what happened later on? Do you think that helped form, or do you see them as two completely separate events? Because you had survivor advocates, you had folks around you that were trauma informed, that were, maybe just a little bit more of that backbone, because I know you're close with your mom, or at least in the interviews I've seen that you're close with your mother, but there is something different when you get that survivor aftercare. I was wondering if that was something that helped give you a little bit more strength to speak out about what happened with Biden.
It did. I think one of the things, my mother was always very supportive of me. And one of the pivotal things was she wanted me to make a police report at the time with Joe Biden, right? And I wouldn't. And I made the sexual harassment report. I didn't go as far as the police because, again, in my mind, the police were there for him, not me. And, my mom being an activist herself, and very, she's an artist, very fiery spirit. She died a few years ago and I miss her dearly. And she, really tried to be supportive and there for me, but at the same time, it was a little much for me, right? So during the domestic violence, she was again very supportive of my daughter and protective of me and my daughter, and spoke out and was very clear about what happened. And she had survived, her own experiences as a young woman. And she really understood it on a cellular level. And I think that, part of this whole thing with domestic violence and sexual assault is that there are so many women in America that suffer. There's more than not, right? And so many stories are silenced, particularly Indigenous and Black women's stories are completely suppressed. And it's just, and, now, we're getting more expansive with the services, which is good with domestic violence and sexual assault. So one of the cognitive dissonances for me is that Joe Biden is the author of the Violence Against Women Act. So that's been really hard because it's something I very much believe in.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really wanted to ask you, and I think we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but is it difficult? How does it feel having to see Joe Biden every day? In the media, on in the corporate press, on social media. What is that experience like?
It's so interesting you brought that up, because I was just articulating this to a friend yesterday. I just did a podcast with somebody whom I really admire, and they didn't really know my story, and I didn't want to talk about it. And I remember at the time, in the moment, I had almost this like flashback of what happened to me with Joe Biden. And, so healing is not linear, right? But I remember thinking to myself, okay, what's going on here? And what it is that, I have to listen and see Joe Biden. His filthy name is everywhere all the time. I just want away from it, but there's nowhere to go. He's leader of the free world, right? Supposedly that's what they call it. Being the American president, he's going to be, front and center. So for me, for the healthy way to deal with it is to turn that rage that I have of no justice into outrage. And I had to really, really let go that there was not going to be any justice. I mean, I couldn't just say the words. I had to just really integrate that into this experience that it's obvious by the way things have rolled out. They will never investigate Joe Biden for this. There will never be a sincere investigation. He won't release the files from University of Delaware, where my complaint was filed. Well, it was filed with the Senate, but that's where it's stored, and he sealed the files. So I just have to accept that what I can do is help other people, and I can lift other political, advocacy, things that are close to my heart. And that's how I'll channel that energy rather than something negative or self-destructive.
So how did you get to that place? How did you find that moment of strength? Because that's a lot of strength. That's a lot of strength. How did you get to that specific moment of strength where you're like, wow, I can look at someone, it would be hard for me just not to say something on every tweet, quote tweet every tweet, have a hot take on, legit, like that is strength that I cannot even think about or comprehend. And, just to put this in a perspective for anyone that's listening, Tara has a completely public case of, a very public case, but it's not that hard when you think in the context of how many survivors have a family member. You have to go to the barbecue, that family member's there. You go to Christmas, that family member's there. Mm-hmm. You might try to tell a family member, a loved one, and you might not be believed. So even though Tara's, specific set of circumstances is very public, this is relatable to a lot of survivors because, your abuser could be someone that you work for, work with. And so these are more normal feelings than I think people are necessarily would think of when they think, because you're very, high profile. I always think about that too. One thing I always want to ask some of the Epstein Maxwell survivors is, one thing that kind of chaps my ass a little bit is like, I don't want to refer to them as the Epstein Maxwell survivors. I hate the fact that this amazing, powerful individual name is intrinsically linked with their abuser or abusers in some cases.
Eliza, yeah, that's a two-edged sword, though, isn't it? Because, the point I'm making with that is they, when they use your first name like they do with me, Tara Reade, it's not going to be good when you read further. Like when the Washington Post, Tara Reade, New York Times, Tara Reade, it's not Joe Biden's accuser. It's not Joe Biden's former senator. It's Tara Reade. Yeah, because they're coming after me. So when they refer to the Epstein survivors, there's been a different kind of tone. Not always. They've had their share of being bashed on social media, and they've had trolls go after them. And, Alan Dershowitz is a monster and he goes after them. And, it's horrible. But my point is that sometimes when you hear them say a survivor's name, it's like, uh-oh.
Not a good. Well, let's get into that a little bit. Let's definitely get into that a little bit because we'll get back to the strength because I'm very interested in hearing about the horses and all the other cool stuff you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
That's the fun stuff. You have one of those stories that I think will forever be pivotal in the survivor space. And, I was kind of disclosing with you a little bit beforehand when you step forward with this particular Joe Biden situation, when you step forward with this, I was new on the survivor scene, I guess, on the public survivor scene. I hate even calling it that because it sounds like a cliquey energy. Let me rephrase it. I had just stepped forward as a public survivor leader.
Right.
And I was really getting my feet wet in what I could say or what I wanted to say, how I wanted to be perceived and what I wanted to just everything. I was new to it. At the time, Me Too was pretty much still sort of ruling the roost in the survivor space. And the Epstein Maxwell survivors had started to get some of that public recognition and some of the support behind them that they have deserved. And then you step forward. One thing that I found was very interesting in learning about your story was how difficult it was to be heard. I want you to explain a little bit of what that was like for you. How difficult was it to be heard?
Very, and you bring up a good point. Yeah. Very, very hard. I decided to come forward in 2019 when Lucy Flores was being torn apart publicly. She came forward about Joe Biden being, she didn't necessarily call it sexual harassment, but by all definitions, it was. And, him kissing her without her permission on the back of the head and putting his hands on her without her permission is wrong. And she was actually asking for his help with her campaign. So she was in a position of deference, and she was a politician. So it was uncomfortable. She called it uncomfortable and even grandfatherly. When I dealt with Joe Biden, he was a younger man and I was in my 20s. It was a very different vibe. He wanted sex right then. He wanted it. And he's used to just getting what he wants. And I rejected him. So part of this whole story and the reason I came forward is that my rejection of him resulted and me protesting and pushing back on the sexual harassment and all of it was that I lost my career immediately. And that was very important for me and to get that out in the public. So I came forward with that group thinking I would have Me Too behind me and time's up, and thinking here's 7 other women, I'm the 8th. And who knows who else is out there. And there are more women, by the way, but they're too scared to come forward. And who can blame them? So yeah, it was very much thinking that I had this protective thing with the Me Too movement. And of course, as you know, I came out and it was like I stepped off a platform to nothing, right?
It was crickets. I'll tell you what I perceived it as, and then you could tell me what it was actually like for you.
Mhm.
As a survivor, and I say myself, I'm 40 years old, but when I say young survivor on the scene, I was sort of a young, fresh survivor on the scene, not in age, but in experience.
Mhm.
It was legitimately crickets or folks picking apart your story, calling you a liar, downplaying it. I heard all types of rumors. I saw all types of rumors. And of course, as a survivor and as an advocate, I saw questions being asked by the corporate press or other things. I was like, oh my gosh, it just sounded so cringe. It looked cringe. And it just, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But I think what stood out the most was the silence by voices that were normally loud in the survivor space and the outright just vicious from folks that would normally speak up. And, we don't need to name names, but that was really a pivotal moment for me because I did see one voice specifically speaking up, and that was Rose McGowan.
Yes.
And I realized through her standing by you that I had to make a decision as a survivor and as a public survivor advocate and as a public survivor leader. Are you going to be about it? Or are you just going to be about it when it's convenient? Are you going to, and that's really what it came down to for me. Are you going to be about it when it's just convenient? Or are you going to be about it all the time? So I'm so grateful that you stepped forward because for me, it shined a mirror to me to say, okay, what are you really about? And I thought the night that I had tweeted out support for you, I was like, oh, I'm probably going to lose like 2,000 followers or something, That's how contentious it was. People could say, oh, I'm being dramatic. It was hot out here, especially about your specific story, in the survivor space.
Yeah.
But I said, I'm going to tweet out support for Tara because I could just see it wasn't there. And I was like, you ain't going to catch me out here.
It was more than not there. They were actively trying to harm me. I mean, his campaign, according to FEC, spent $2.2 million on his image and trying to silence my story. Hillary Rosen, who's one of the founders of Time's Up, was calling like Law and Crime and calling other outlets, telling them not to run stories about me. And the editor-in-chief.
Let's go back to Time's Up, because you went to Time's Up. And I want folks to understand this as they're listening.
Yeah.
I want folks to understand. So Time's Up is an organization specifically designed to serve survivors and to educate, raise awareness. This is their entire job. This is what they collect funding for. This is what they collect donations for. They were almost sort of, I don't know how to explain it, but they were almost sort of like a Me Too sort of. They weren't specifically a part of Me Too, but they were a part of that Me Too flow and sort of came out at the same time. This would be an organization you would go to, like one of the only options for Tara to go to. I want folks to understand this in the survivor space. If you have a public case of sexual harassment, sexual assault, especially in the workplace, that was Time's Up entire bag. So you went to Time's Up, didn't you, Tara? You went to them and asked for support and help. And what happened?
I went to them before I was public about it. I mean, I had been public about the sexual harassment, but I wanted something around me to come forward about the sexual assault. I was afraid to come forward all the way. So that's why I came forward a little bit. It's like putting the toe in the water. And then like immediately I was called a Russian agent, which we can address later during that. And then I put my whole foot in the water and then I was really called that. And then, it went from there. But I went to Time's Up and I also went to politicians for help because remember, I worked for Congressman Leon Panetta as an intern. I worked for, State Senator Jack O'Connell for years as a legislative assistant, working in the office or, doing all the kinds of works that you do with constituency work. I worked with, Senator Joe Biden, and I also worked on congressional races. So I had this, work history. So I went to politicians for help. Absolute silence. So then I went to Time's Up. They took the case. Now, there had been a little bit about my sexual harassment. I hadn't talked about the sexual assault. They immediately, and what I didn't know is that Anita Dunn was the founder and Tina Chen was running Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, right? And Anita Dunn's PR firm does work for Time's Up victims. So when a survivor has a public story, her Knickerbocker, it's called, her PR firm will help them and protect them. So I, of course, applied, right? Not knowing that she was already working for Joe Biden. And guess what? Time's Up never told me. So how my story kind of got elevated was Ryan Grimm from The Intercept exposed the corruption of Time's Up. And he exposed this link. So I learned with everybody else that Anita Dunn was working for Joe Biden. Because when I had applied for the PR help, they rejected me. They kept me stringing along for the legal help, couldn't get a lawyer, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the last thing they said, oh, well, we can't represent you because this is too political, meaning Joe Biden. The day they had the meeting with me about that, Tina Chen went to a Biden fundraiser that day with other Obama staff. So it was really gross. And now the Cuomo case, later came in and exposed that further. But Ryan Grimm was the first reporter to expose that Time's Up was really a catch and kill for the elites.
Truthfully. And, you want to talk about grinding me down to a nub. Like, there is nothing more disgusting to me than folks that specifically seek out access to vulnerable populations and then exploit them further. To me, that is just about as low as you can get. Mm-hmm. I think that with the Cuomo survivors, who I've definitely supported, especially Lindsay Boylan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a really cool survivor, and just cool spirit in general. But, I was so happy when they were exposed, but it just drives me crazy that survivors have to be further exploited when they're already down, and we do see this.
Yeah, look what happened to Rose. Look what happened to Rose McGowan. She went through
another pivotal moment.
Yeah.
It sucks that people have to be those pivotal moments. I hate it. that I have to sit here, have a conversation with a woman that was a pivotal moment. That it stinks that someone had to be that. Rose was definitely that. And she still in some ways is. She will forever be.
She's a cultural resetter, I call her, but she's also a creative force, and she has so many talents. And she had been nominated for a film that she had directed in a film festival. She has a music thing out. I owe Rose McGowan a debt of so much gratitude, because she has stood by me, and some of the strength that you were referring to me that I had was really channeled through me, through talks that she and I had, because we talked for a while back and forth. She found me, actually. I'm forgetting, through another Weinstein survivor, but she tracked me down and on the phone, our first conversation. And one of the first things she said to me was, after she said, "Oh, I found you," was because I was really being hard to find at that time, because things were kind of crazy. But she said, I believe you. And those three words, like, relaxed me. Like, I didn't have to, defend myself, like I'm just defending a dissertation, which is how the press had made me feel. It was like I was on trial, and she just was there.
I love that about her. And I also too, and I've never told her this, but I do suck some energy from her as well. She is so fearless and so badass. She is like the epitome of strength and just raw authenticity and fearlessness. And I have pulled a lot of strength from that, because my instinct is to, of course, I don't get anything that wild on Twitter, but I've gotten my fair share of, trolls and different folks that want to come at me for whatever is their reason. But, I just pull from her a lot. She never backed down, and she's had the world against her, and she, and so I do pull from survivors like that. One thing, I don't think folks fully understand what it's like to have an entire mob after you on social media, or, maybe almost instigated by the corporate media or corporate press.
Yeah, it's intense.
I
lost family members over it. I mean, you know what I mean? Lost contact with family, friends, whatever. Friends were like,
they don't support you, or?
Well, both. I mean, like, people were just like, they would, if they wanted to support me, they'd be threatened of being doxxed, their lives exposed. Like, they went after anyone who supported me. They went after reporters. They went after Katie Halper, Ryan Grimm, Rich McHugh. Rich McHugh is the investigative reporter that worked with Ronan Farrow, and he did several articles on me. They went after him. I mean, and it wasn't just, by they, I don't mean just random weirdos on social media. I mean, there was a concentrated paid effort by the Democratic National Committee to go after people, to stop them and silence them, to get this story suppressed. And they, remember, they were saying, win at any cost. They meant it. And they tried to have me put in prison twice. Once I was accused of the espionage thing. Another time was being accused of perjury. And that's gone away, of course, because it didn't happen. But I had to get lawyers. I had to deal with it. It caused health problems for me because because they were threatening me with 25 years in prison. So two things helped me. So I want to talk about good things that helped me. Yeah. Rose McGowan was one, huge. And without her support, I don't even know if I would be here, because she really helped kind of pick me up and like, okay, I've been through this and worse. This is what you're going to have happen. Anita Hill called me, and she, was dragged through it because of Biden. So Anita Hill is the person that came about Justice Clarence Thomas. And, she's a law professor now. She called me, and that was really energizing and helpful to me. So I received a lot of support from certain people. But then RT came along, or I came along. I kind of knocked on RT's door, pounding on their door, actually, because I wanted to work for them. So I wanted to write for them. And because I wanted to take back the narrative after I was being decimated by, corporate media. And they actually were gracious and lovely. And they never used me as clickbait. Like, when my story was at a site, they had me a couple times, but it was a very dignified platform. I wasn't clickbait. They were very gentle. It was really nice. And that's why I trusted them. And I've been now with them a year, doing different writing and different things freelance. And I mean, they literally picked me up off the ground and dusted me off. Like, I was just down. So I have a huge gratitude to them. And, there's other supporters that came along, Avalon Claire, who did my graphic arts, and she had a group of people that came around me. So Shanley was a person who survived IT things. She came along and helped. So I had these pockets, and Lou Godbold is the Weinstein supporter, and she's been amazing. She's always right by my side. She's, and she and I go back and forth because she's English and she loves literature. And so she always makes fun of my Irishness, and we have fun because she's very English. And so we have fun together. And she's very, as she's a expert in brain trauma as well. So those are the good things. So I met some really amazing people and had amazing conversations with brilliant minds and good people. At the same time, I was just being dragged through.
Well, you found your tribe. You found your tribe. I think it's difficult for folks to understand. There have been a couple of times I've logged on to Twitter and your name was trending, and I'm just like terrified to click on it. I'm like, oh no.
Whenever it's trending, like,
in fact, my friend, I'm like, not, oh no, like, because of that's how you said, yeah. It's almost like when your name's brought up, it's like, oh no, it would be awesome if it was something good, like you were, nominated for, a Nobel Peace Prize for saving horses or something. But I'm not that naive where I think this. I think it's really important for other survivors or folks that are processing through trauma while listening to this, that you started writing, you wrote your book, and RT was very supportive with that. I think what you're touching on, another issue that drives me really insane, of course, Me Too was either crickets or the left. Let's just say anyone left of center, right? Was either crickets or not believing you, or believed you and kind of brushed it under anyway. Was like, okay, I can't deal with that right now. It's inconvenient for me right now. So we're just going to keep it pushing. But what I also saw, was the right using your story as sort of a political hammer and a political sword. You don't have to agree or disagree. This is just my perspective with it.
No, they did. But remember, I went on and then I said that both parties, and they had me on and they let me say it on Fox. I said, both Republicans and Democrats have problems. And I came out against Trump. They gave me a little bit of play, but Eliza, not much. I mean, not like as if I would have, had I been a Trump supporter, I would have been all over the news.
Or you would have been a mega celebrity. You would have been a mega celebrity, and they would have lifted you up until you weren't useful anymore, and then dropped you like a hot potato. Exactly. And that's, in my journey, it would have been very beneficial to be, fully MAGA 2020 or fully left. It would be very beneficial, but eventually, this is another thing that I had to make a decision for myself, sort of stepping forward, was eventually I'm going to have to end up standing up for an abuser because of political. I'm going to have to do something that is against my moral character, and carry water for an abuser. That's the truth, because there's abusers everywhere, right? So if you're going to be that politically attached, you're eventually going to have to stand up for something that contradicts itself. And I don't know.
You're absolutely right. That's why, I have been asked to, to join the Green Party, to join the People's Party, which are lovely. I mean, they're all really wonderful, right? I will never be part of the Democratic Party again, but I choose to be not politically affiliated anymore, because I don't want to be used, and I don't think it's going to be, it just doesn't work right now. Right now, the America we live in doesn't support actual democracy. Let's face it. We're not. We're an oligarchy that's been taken over by, international companies, and that's what's going on. And we're in a class war and a race war and a gender war. It's all happening at once. And, I think that what you're saying is true. If you end up with the Republicans, you'll end up not talking about Trump's, well, I'm sorry, he has 27 people that came forward. One of them I know and have talked to, two of them actually, and one of them I've had long conversations with. So you can't, I can't support him. I've talked to the people that he hurt.
I don't think not supporting Trump is that hard. I don't think he's not an easy person to support regardless.
No, I know. I would never.
I get what you're saying. It's, you eventually end up having to carry water for someone that, or letting things slide that you wouldn't normally let slide. And that's not, right. I don't know. I try not to get too political with things, because at the end of the day, and you'll get this too, when I speak to survivors, I'm like not interested in what they believe politically at all. It very rarely comes up, because it's more about them. And, I don't know. It's funny, because out in the public space, politics does mean so much, so I guess out on Twitter and in public, but when I'm having a one-on-one with a survivor, I'm never like, so how did you vote? You know what I mean? Like, it's just not a thing that comes up unless it's survivor wants to talk about it.
I mean, but everything is politics though, Eliza, right? So we are in this world that we're moved by what's happening, particularly now which leads me to this thought about, kind of going back to 2019 and 2020 when I came out. The first question I was asked when I came, when right after the Katie Halper show was elevated, it came out like the sexual assault. Washington Post, Beth Reinhardt calls me on the phone, and I will call her out because this was okay. And when people hear this, I want them to know this is what you don't ask a survivor.
I already know what you're going to say. And I'm like, okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
You said, Tara, this is Beth Reinhardt from the Washington Post. That's her voice. Yeah, it's very, very, very New York. This is Beth Reinhardt from the Washington Post. You're coming out against Joe Biden. Don't you realize this will hurt his campaign? And I was stunned. And then she said, and as we went forward and I told her what happened to me, she said, did he touch your clitoris? And I was like, what? And anyway, the whole conversation was so gross and so demeaning. I ended up afterwards, like I was crying. I was in the bathroom and then just crying. And I was sick. I was nauseous. It was horrible. And so that was my Washington Post experience.
I saw you leave that comment the other day underneath the journalists. I saw you leave that you saying what that journalist had asked you.
Yeah.
I was in the driveway, believe it or not, in the middle of winter. I was in the driveway of a Dairy Queen, and I was like sitting there waiting for the ice cream to come through the window. And
Right.
I was like looking at Twitter, and I had the notifications on. I saw that come through. I'm telling you, when I saw that a journalist had asked you that very personal question,
Right.
I'm telling you, it was that I felt nauseous. I was like trying to envision. I had to pull over, and I swear to you, I stared at it for a while before and all I could muster out was, I think I replied to you, and you should have never been asked that question. That there is a big problem. Survivors need the corporate press a little bit to get our stories out there, to educate, raise awareness, to tell our stories. And it's very important, like you said earlier on, it's very, very important and crucial that journalists, if they're going to be speaking to survivors or talking to survivors about their stories, that they become trauma informed. And a lot of organizations do media training for journalists that are going to be speaking to survivors. It's not that we don't want to give up the nitty gritty. It's just like a matter kind of how the question is framed. That's how I feel. You can ask about anything.
She was asking it to imply that I got pleasure, right? And that was her point. She was trying to make it seem like, okay, let's say it happened, but you wanted it, right? And that was what the gross part was. I got what she was doing. It was horrible. It was already being implied because they were kind of like, I don't know what Biden was saying in the background, but for a while there was this thing like, well, maybe he did do it, but then it's consensual. It's consensual. And they were trying to throw that at the wall, like, throwing spaghetti at the wall, what'll stick, sort of when these things come out. And I was like, boy, whoever's advising the Biden campaign, they're so stupid. This is such the wrong path to go down. Like, don't go down that path because it's darkness and not true. And
victim blaming is so, we're slowly getting better, right? We're slowly getting a little bit better, but that level of victim blaming. And once again, I know that a lot of survivors that are going to be listening to this podcast relate to that. They go and tell a friend or a loved one, it's the tales all the time. How are you dressed? How much did you have to drink? Oh, okay. What if you had consensual sex with them before? Folks are sexually assaulted even from within the bounds of marriage and relationships that would normally be consensual, but then are, sexually assaulted even from when, no means no. It doesn't matter what other agreement you have. And, I think that that's something, hopefully as a culture, we can start to tear down some of that victim blaming. I always tell folks, when a survivor discloses, I believe you. What can I do to help? What can I do to help you? And let the survivor lead the way.
Yeah. and they were really focused on my like sexual behavior and like what I was doing. Yeah, I was single and free at that time. I am again. I'm now because I'm divorced, but like at that time in my 20s, I was exploring, boyfriends but boyfriends my age. I didn't go out with older men. I didn't go out with politicians. To me, they were my dad's age and I wasn't interested. One, two, they had too much to lose. Like even then I knew they're not safe. Like you don't go out with them. They're not good. Most of them were married and most of them were, a handful. And I told people asked me if I was attracted to Biden. I just wasn't. I can't describe to you why. I just didn't like him. Some women did. Some women found him attractive at that time. I did not. And it wasn't like he was flirtatious with me. It wasn't like there was any precursor. It wasn't like he was asking me out or having some sort of relationship with me. He literally just tried to have sex with me in that moment. That was it.
One thing that I think is really important with your story is the sexual harassment prior to the actual assault. That you telling those pieces of your story really spoke to me because I just related to it so much. So you have had amazing jobs and you have an amazing resume, right? You're a very intelligent woman. And while working for Biden, and if I get any aspect of this story incorrect, please correct me. You were asked to serve drinks and wear a short skirt because Joe Biden liked your legs. And I related to that so much because here I am, a woman just trying to find my way. And I never felt like the brightest bulb in the bunch. And to just be made to feel like all you were was just your looks and a nice set of legs. I related to that a lot. And I'm glad that so originally for folks and anyone that doesn't know your full story is that's what you had originally come forward and talked about, the sexual harassment, which is important, by the way. Like if that was all you had shared, to me, that would have been enough. That's kind of a crucial thing that you felt that way.
Right. It's interesting. I had been, as you know, an actor and a model before. So I had been in Hollywood. I'd done La Bamba. I was a dancer. I'd done some modeling. And right before I went to, DC, there was and it's in my book, I talk about, I did some bikini modeling thing for a Mars bar commercial, whatever. Anyway. And so I'm
a Mars bar commercial. That's cool. That's cool.
In Europe and stuff like that, and in America, I guess a little. But so we're all lined up, a bunch of us, and I have my friend next to me because the execs from the Mars bar came by and they wanted to look at us, and one of them just reached out and said something in German, which I understood enough of it to get the gist. And touched my, my breasts, playfully, whatever, didn't know me, just doing it while we were lined up. And I started to punch it, raised up my hand, I was going to punch him. My friend holds it down. She goes, "We need this kid." She goes, just hold your temper. And I wrote about that in my book because I was used to being objectified and I didn't like it. I had to earn money that day. I completed the gig. I did it. But I didn't like how I was not seen as anything but just sort of this physical form that they wanted to move around. And, my love for acting came from classical theater and studying that and doing plays and really doing that part. I wasn't really too interested in the other parts that were, adjacent to that. And so when I went to DC, I already kind of had this feeling okay, now I'm going to be taken seriously. This is the land of serious jobs, right? I was so fucking wrong. I was so naive. I did not know. It was a senator. It was like Caligula. It was like a senator's playground. There was so much sexual harassment that they did a poll, apparently around the years that I was there, 75% of staffers were sexually harassed. And I don't know about the assault rate, but, and the dangerous thing about that is, and when we talk about sexual harassment, I'm a flirtatious person. I'm a sexual person. I love men. I love everything about all of that. But I don't like it to mean I lose my job if I say no. If I say no, I have the right and I should be able to just go on with my life, right?
I think so many people can relate to that. I really do. I swear they do, and it's hard, Tara, because I don't want to be not approachable to men. I don't want men to feel like they can't open a door for me, help me with something, tell me I look beautiful today. I don't want to live in a world where I can't get a compliment. On the flip side, I don't want you to, if I'm a server at a restaurant, I don't want you to smack my ass when I walk by. You know what I mean? It's like there's levels to it. And I know everybody's different. And I'm grateful that, because I feel like things have changed a little. But when I was listening to your story today, and I've listened to quite a few, not versions, your stories remain consistent as far as I'm concerned, but just different podcasters and different folks that interviewed you. Just different interviewers. But, one thing that I had a flashback was to one of my first jobs. I was a server, and the owner and I was 16, you know what I mean? I was a 16-year-old Eliza. I was homeschooled at the time. And I remember the cooks and the owners being total sexual creeps. And I was not from an environment where that was how my mother was talked to. I just wasn't around that. And how creepy you feel. You feel like, okay, I need this job. I want this job. So I'll kind of giggle and put up with it, but like I'm fully creeped out and I'm scared to walk out to my car alone at night. I think that that's really important. And, I hesitated whether or not to bring this up, but I think it is a very powerful piece of your story. One of the parts that had stood out to you specifically was when, I hope I do not butcher this when I say it, but Biden had implied to you after the assault, had said something along the lines of, "You mean nothing to me. You are nothing."
Mm-hmm.
And that was a pivotal moment for you. Mm-hmm. And as folks are listening to that, I want them to remember, the body we heal, we heal from the things that go on for the most part, sometimes we don't all the way, but those words that are said to survivors, especially when they're intermixed with assault. So you have that fear, because you have that fear of, I could die, something else really horrible could happen. But the words mixed in with that, I felt that so deeply, Tara, because here you are trying to be taken seriously for the intelligent woman that you are, trying to do an awesome job at your job with somebody that you respected. And this individual made you feel like worse than trash. I don't think people fully understand the long-lasting effects that has on survivors. I really don't.
You're right. I mean, that thing that he said to me stayed with me as much as the assault did. Yes. Because at that moment, I knew my life was shattered. Like everything is shattered.
Job.
It wasn't just that he assaulted me, which was the physical thing I was getting over. And I remember our kneecaps had clashed just because of the way he had kind of pushed apart my legs. But the way he did it, our kneecaps, and I had pain. Like, I remember the pain physically. I remember the smell. I remember I didn't like the way he smelled. I remember I didn't like him. And that when he said that. First, he said, "Come on, I heard you liked me." It was cajoling, right?
Right.
And then he got angry, and he smiles when he's angry, which is very disconcerting. It's very, counterintuitive to what, as a human being, usually people don't smile when they're angry. And he does. And he did it to staff. Like I'm sure he still does. And it's just who he is. He's not a good person, I don't think. Anyway, what happened to me in that moment affected my self-esteem deeply, because regardless of me knowing logically that what he did was wrong, he was in a position of such power and he was so revered that I still hadn't kind of put together in my mind, this happened. This isn't congruent with good behavior, But he gives off now that this whole thing that really got to me when he was running for president is this moral thing. He was running on morality. He even said it. And about being a good Catholic and his whole Catholic, it's all bullshit. He's not at all, or when it's convenient for him. He runs on his grief, which he's had a lot of grief. I felt bad for him. I mean, I've had sympathy for that. He lost part of his family and then his son. Those are unimaginable losses.
Really quickly, Tara, because I know for folks that aren't survivors, hearing that you have sympathy for someone that you have accused of assault, that doesn't read to most people. And I understand it. But if you could maybe, because is that from you as a result of you doing work on yourself as a survivor, your healing journey? Or where do you think that ability to have sympathy for someone that has assaulted you comes from? Because that's pretty intense.
I don't know. I always it was a very complicated relationship in the sense that he was my boss. And I empathized with, I knew him, and like I saw him in different situations. I saw him personally share about the loss of his wife and his daughter in that car accident and how much pain that must have been. And then saw later on, of course, that, his son dying.
So you're someone that can, so you're someone that can know that two things can be true at once in your head, is basically
right. It's like many things can be true at once.
Yeah.
You have to hold it in your head and your heart.
So you have the ability to have compassion for people, maybe ways that folks have suffered in their own life, but then don't show them, like, you're not giving them a carte blanche to do whatever else they want to because as a result of maybe some trauma that they've faced, but you can recognize that folks have been through trauma. And I think that's really interesting. I've had a really difficult time piecing that out, especially in public. So as a survivor of human trafficking, I was a survivor, specifically coercion with human trafficking, very strong trauma bonds and, Stockholm syndrome with my former abuser. It's creepy that I even say that with a smile on my face. I don't even know why I'm saying that with a smile on my face, but I do understand that. I think as a survivor of that deep trauma bond or Stockholm syndrome, it's like, you see multiple facets of someone. So I just want folks to remember that for everyone's trauma looks different. It looks different. And for you can recognize that he's been through some things, but are not giving him carte blanche to get over.
No, I mean, it didn't have the right to do that. I think his behavior towards women in general is pretty misogynistic. I saw that working for him. And now looking back, it was like, woo, that's really misogynistic. But, then in that time, it didn't seem as bad. It seemed, because it was pretty normalized by Bill Clinton, right? Bill Clinton normalized misogyny in a way that really did service to the whole country and everyone involved, the world, actually. He's, and what's creepy about these men, though, what I don't forgive is the way they use their resources and the way Joe Biden has used his resources to go after me, to try to imprison me, to try to silence me, to call me a Russian agent or a traitor, to, his staff. I left this part out. Something that happened, and it's part of the silencing process, right? That happened to me, my experience. When I was trying to come forward about the sexual harassment at the time, I went through protocol, right? I didn't go to the press. I just went through protocol that you go through. And I filed a sexual harassment report. So I went to my 3 supervisors and then filed this sexual harassment report with the Senate. And they were kind of disorganized how they did it back then. Now they've changed. But the press secretary was Evelyn Lieberman. The person that worked for her as her assistant, I would work with sometime, because back then you had your titles, you had your things that you did, but people, it was all hands on deck. You did whatever. So sometimes I would work with the press secretary, assistant press secretary, editing something or writing something, whatever. Anyway, so he knew me. And he said to me, I told him that I filed it, and he said, Tara, we will fucking destroy you. And he didn't mean it, like, he wasn't saying like him personally. He knew what happened, but he was saying, we will fucking destroy you. He meant the machine. And that was so intimidating in my 20s.
That they tried to They've tried to destroy you?
That was in 93. That was when I filed the sexual harassment. He said, we will fucking destroy you. So in other words, shut up, go away. So, and the chief of staff called me in and said, look, we're going to pay you through this, that you're not a good fit, took away all my duties, all that. So they did all those things, right? All the things that you hear about in workplaces that they're not supposed to do when there's a sexual harassment case, to make me go away. I wasn't a good fit. So they stripped me of my duties supervising interns. They put me in this office with no windows, kind of in a closeted area. I was not allowed to talk to any other staff. I was told to check in with Dennis Toner, who was my immediate supervisor, and even to call him if I had to go to the restroom, if I left the desk. I wasn't to have any phone conversations. Yeah, it was like that. It was like that.
My best friend always tells me not to roll my eyes when I'm doing interviews or podcasts, because she's like, it looks like you're rolling your eyes at the person that's speaking. And I can't help it sometimes, because there's so much ludicrous nonsense out here. I hope maybe one day I'll break that habit. But, and you were asked to change the way that you dress, which I think is so insulting. I've also had that same experience in corporate atmosphere. I'm, a well-endowed, curvy woman, and, an outfit that, it's not like I'm intentionally being provocative, but you can't, unless I'm wearing like a full nun's outfit, like it's pretty much gonna, unless I'm wearing a sack, it's pretty much gonna look, and that's so insulting and condescending. And it just goes back to that same, you're only what you are aesthetically. And, I was thinking, it's not that folks are complaining about being good looking, because this happens to all types of men and women and all different types of folks. There's not a specific look that this happens to. It's not a specific gender. Anyone can feel this way. Literally anyone can feel this way. It's not that anyone's too good looking. So I never want to give off that impression. It's like, oh, I was so good looking and it was such a burden.
Well, but I said that's a myth. I mean, like it has to do with, at the time, obviously in my 20s, and I had just been a model and an actor. Yeah, I was okay. I caught his attention and he wanted to do that. But like, it could have been, I could have been anybody else. I think there were other people he was, whatever, having consensual kind of attractions with that weren't that background. No, that doesn't have anything to do with it. It's about power and control.
Yes.
It's like when he first was like putting his hands on me, it's like he was getting me used to him putting his hands on me, now that I look back on it. But at the time, I didn't understand. I've always had curly hair, and then it was, I styled it kind of more curly than it even was. So people weirdly would want to touch it, right? Like my hair, since I was a kid, it's a phenomenon thing. So I just kind of thought, oh, okay, well, he likes to touch my hair. So I just, whatever. Some people do, some people don't. So it was the way he did it. He put his hands on my shoulder and then he would massage underneath my hair, massage my neck, or he would make a point of touching me or winking at me or just doing something. And it was just kind of like, okay, well, that's okay. But I wasn't returning it, right? Those kinds of flirtations that you have where it's an actual flirtation. I wasn't returning it. He was still kind of scary to me. And he had a lot of power and I wasn't interested in him. So yeah, and then of course the drinks thing came up, but yeah, it doesn't, our culture is so buried in physicality and objectifying women, and they are for the sexual pleasure of men, and that's how a lot of our media and our television and film is, and I just wrote a piece about how Russian men are not only objectified, but then there's Russophobia on top of it. So they're really just, desecrated in the media and stereotyped. So I've always said that America, rape culture is institutionalized. And it's like, how do you push up against an institution? So anyway, I told that story because I wanted to point out different ways we're intimidated and silenced. And for me, it was the professional threat, and there was always kind of like this thing, well, maybe I can still get a job if I get through this, right?
Do you think, and this is, I only briefly want to touch on this. So the assault with Biden happened prior to the domestic violence relationship. Is that, or it was like right before? Do you think that played a role in you being almost more vulnerable to the domestic violence situation?
Absolutely, because I let in a person who was very controlling and dominating that I normally wouldn't have. Like, he was doing some behavior that early on I should have, for instance, I'm late sometimes, and that's like who I am. Okay, whatever. We had this, I don't remember. It was too long ago. We were going somewhere and I was supposed to be at this place. I'm also, another thing about me is I have no sense of direction, like absolutely none. My life kind of shows, but like literally I could probably die in the wilderness because I just have no ability to know where I am. So I got lost and ended up like in Maryland when I was supposed to go to his house at the time we were dating. And because they have these turnpikes in Washington, D.C. It's very confusing.
It is confusing.
And I'm with that. So I showed up, I was like 30 minutes later, a little bit longer. He was so annoyed and he was convinced I was with somebody else. And I was like, dude, I just got off work. Like, I don't have it like that. Like, I mean, it was just so funny. Like, but I remember at the time, and he did a couple behaviors like that. He was really jealous, like irrationally. And I thought, and then, but see, we're culturized to think that's a compliment. It's not a compliment. When someone's jealous, that's just a red flag. Like, they're waving the crazy flag. Look, but you know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. You know how many times in my life I've looked back and said, okay, that was a red flag. That was a red flag. That was a red flag. I tell survivors now, trust your gut. Sure. When that gut goes off, even if you're on a first date, even if you're on a dating app, if you catch a vibe, and it sounds so to talk about vibes, but if you catch that vibe, if you get that feeling in your gut, even if you're hanging out with your friends, if your friend says something that you're like, oh, she's gossiping a little bit too much, what's she going to say about me behind my back? That's a red flag. You have those gut instincts for a reason. You have to follow them, but I just sort of wondered that, because I was like, wow, you took the professional hit. This assault had happened, but the professional hit's pretty a deep cut. You had been objectified multiple times, and then almost automatically you sort of went right into that domestic violence situation where, of course, it doesn't, it doesn't always start out with individuals punching you directly in the face. That's kind of one of the last steps. It starts off with the red flags. So I was really wondering, I was thinking when I was listening to your story, I was like, wow, that sort of seemed like it all played in together and worked. It was almost a perfect storm for a bad environment. So after your healing, throughout your healing process and your healing journey, throughout stepping forward, what type of advice, words of wisdom would you give to survivors that are thinking about stepping forward, that maybe want to step forward, whether it be through writing, stepping forward through podcasts, stepping forward, even on Twitter? What have you learned along your journey, even for me to learn, because you've been out here, you've been through the storm a million times. What are the things that you've learned being a public survivor, and then also in your healing journey that have given you strength?
Well, everybody has their own way of, likes and dislikes. For me, writing is my escape. It's my vocation. I've always wanted to be in acting and writing. I loved classical theater. I loved doing that. I loved, the playwriting process and learning about that. I love poetry. I had some poetry published. I consider my poetry really bad, but like I look back at it now and it just makes me cringe, but whatever. but you grow and you learn. But my writing is like my shelter from everything. So I've always written throughout my life. So that's how it also allowed me to take back my narrative. And that's important for survivors. What I would say to survivors is, don't think it's, if it's a powerful person, you're going to be threatened, but, with incarceration, they're going to silence you, try to erase you. They're going to go after your family and your friends. They're going to go after people that support you. They've paid people to say bad things about me. I found out. I think the betrayals that you experience, like for instance, when I found out that someone I knew was paid to talk badly about me to the press, what do you do with that? That kind of betrayal. It's deep and it's harmful and it's hurtful. What I would say is that some of this will impact you on a cellular level. So you have to be ready to find your healing path, and it's not linear. It's going to be whatever. I tend to love music. I love art. I love horses, and I loved being in the outdoors. So I don't like cities, never have. And I lived in DC, but I didn't like it. So for me, nature has been an important part of the healing. And, not to get too woo-woo, but like doing meditation really helped me, and some yoga. And I swim. I'm a swimmer, and I like to, ride bikes, and I like to ride my horse. And when I feel like, I don't know, there's this Lana Del Rey song where she says, I've got war in my mind. Like when you get that, I've got a war in my mind, just get on a horse or get on a bike or ride or run.
Isn't Lana Del Rey so everything? Isn't she so everything with her look and her whole vibe? I love her. I have my Lana Del Rey moments where I just am obsessed. No, she's pretty cool. And her eyeliner is always perfect.
Yes.
I think specifically for stepping forward, how would you, for somebody that maybe is high profile, or where the specifically the survivor story needs to be heard, in retrospect, how do you wish you had done that differently, if at all? And what advice would you give to survivors that are thinking about going public, especially against somebody high profile?
That's a good question, because Time Is Up is gone. It's been dismantled.
My time's up.
My time's up.
My time's up.
Sayonara. Saying bye, Felicia. But I don't know. But seriously, when I have to say, I had a list, which is really probably not healthy. It's kind of like Promising Young Womanish. That movie, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I had a list of people that I wanted to have some restorative justice about. And one of them was Anita Dunn. The other was Tina Chen. The other was Hillary Rosen. I mean, I had a list of names literally written down. And Alison Turcos, who's this amazing advocate for sexual assault survivors, she organized 60 of us that had bad experiences, very similar to one another, with Time's Up stringing us along, doing bad things, like covering up for the abusers, blah, blah, blah. And so you saw it go public, and that started the fall of all the people resigning. And now it's been dismantled to 2 staff members. And I have to say, it felt good when Hillary Rosen stepped down. It was like, check. Tina Chen, check. And then, and I was doing the Fox interviews at the same time, and I was pushing hard. So when I couldn't get justice with the Joe Biden thing, I put my energy into that, to exposing them. And I'm glad I did, because now if they really try to revitalize that organization, it will actually help people and not, harm, and not be, this kind of place where elites can go to get their sexual misconduct.
Once you break trust with survivors, it's pretty much impossible to get it back. Folks always ask me, how to best serve survivors. I'm like, number one, you gain their trust, and you remain somebody that they can trust, and you remain consistent.
Right.
Once you break a survivor's trust, this is just my experience. It really only takes one time with me personally. And that probably sounds cold, and I don't think people fully understand that, but it'll be something small. Like if you and I are friends, Tara, and if you just gave my phone number to a journalist without asking with me first, even if it was like the cover of New York Times, like, Eliza, I think you'd be awesome for the cover of New York Times. I'm going to give you, I would forever pretty much not trust you. I'm telling you, like, that's kind of how I am. It's survival. This is survival for me. Yeah. So I'm very intense about that. And with Time's Up, and, it's hard, Tara, because I know that they have helped some survivors. I know that Me Too helped so many survivors. So I hate to dog out the whole thing, but the organization.
No, it's okay, Eliza, because Me Too was meant for Tarana Burke. It was originally put together for Black and brown Indigenous women whose stories weren't getting held. And then it got co-opted by, Alyssa Milano and the Democratic Party. No, I'm sorry. They need to be called out. They need to get back on track. And it's not Tarana Burke's fault. You got to look at the establishment elites that took that from her, because she had a beautiful movement. Now we have a word, actually, Me Too. You can just say that word, that vernacular, we understand it. And I think Rose McGowan made that point that, it gave a framework. And then it got co-opted by the.
But it didn't remain consistent. And that's when you're talking about survivors, it's really crucial that you remain consistent. So moving forward, you do amazing.
Yes, and I did answer your question. I'm sorry.
I think you did. I think you did do a good job. I think.
About survivors coming forward with a powerful person. What advice would I give? I got kind of caught up in the Time's Up thing.
You said I wanted to stick it to Time's Up, and then you did.
I just like it. I still obviously throwing out some trauma there with that. But what I wanted to say about, I want survivors to know that it's not easy, and that if you come forward, it's really good to erase all your social media, especially like I have. Yeah,
that's good advice. So I think that's good advice. Clean the slate as much as possible,
and then like warn all your, current, past lovers, friends, whatever, that hey, you might get a call from the Washington Post. They might knock on your door. But on a serious note, just be ready for your privacy to not be honored in the best way, and it's okay to say no. If I could have hung up on Beth, looking back, I could have just said, fuck off, Beth, and hung up on her. But I think fine. She's not doing that.
But I want to talk about that really quickly, because I was thinking about that while I was watching the Megyn Kelly interview. I was very put off by the question, were you wearing crotchless panties? I don't even want to stay there. I want to get to the point of why I'm bringing this up. Okay. Megyn Kelly asked if you were wearing crotchless panties during the assault. In everyone's head, they're probably thinking, oh yeah, you just say, fuck you, I'm out, interview over, like some rock star, whip your, I'm out of here. And then you act like a rock star. When you're a regular citizen that's trying not to look crazy and trying to look credible, you're not gonna let your trauma be on full display. Not even that's trauma, because to be honest, if anybody said that to me at a coffee shop or whatever, I'd be like, I'm out, deuces. But if I'd even say that, I might just stand up and they can watch my dust as I get out. But I mean, I think when you're a survivor stepping forward, I don't think folks fully realize, like, you're trying not to look crazy, not eccentric, not artistic. That's one thing that's different. But I think when survivors step forward, we're instantly The spotlight is shined on us. Is this somebody who's credible? Is this person crazy? I think you don't want to look like a crazy jilted lover. So of course you didn't walk out or tell Megyn Kelly to kiss your whole ass when she asked you if you were wearing crotchless panties. Of course you didn't tell a huge journalist from one of the biggest publications in the entire world when they asked such a private, disgusting question. You carried on because you wanted to be heard and you didn't want to look crazy. So I don't know. That's one thing that really stood out to me in preparing for this. I was like, yeah, she wanted to be heard, and she was almost willing to put that disgusting question aside to continue to be heard.
I don't, going back to that, I was a little shocked by the question, but at the same time, she was making a point that I think got made of how disgusting people are in the media, because she was actually bringing up something that was just being raked through the media at that particular moment, what I was wearing. And so in a way, it gave me a chance to address the rape myth. So I really don't mind that Megyn Kelly, because I had told her and I could have had that removed because she, she was polite and did say she didn't want to traumatize me. And I said, no, ask me anything. And she did. She asked me about if I was a Russian agent. She asked me if I liked Vladimir Putin, and she asked me like all of these questions, and including that one. Yes, I'm a very, at that time, I was a young person and I was wearing lingerie underneath my clothes because I was.
You don't even need to get into. You don't even need
to. No. But what I'm saying is that I didn't mind saying it, and I don't mind even saying it now because. Right. I want women to hear it's okay to be sexual. What happened to us is one moment in time. It doesn't take away who we are. It's okay to be natural beings in the world without having to have it forced on us. So, my whole point is that it doesn't matter whether I could have been wearing a tracksuit, really, frankly. He was going to do what he was going to do. That's it. He 100%. Wanted what he wanted in that moment. Yeah, and it's 100%. More about power and control.
I think I'm probably a little more sensitive when I listen to survivors' interviews. So, I mean, if you're cool with it, that makes me happy. And I think
I'm not cool with it, but we have to, Eliza, we have to realize that this is the American culture that we're dealing with. And if we don't address it, it'll be addressed in a negative way, and the survivor never gets their voice. Dispelling rape myths is awesome. And I think I'll do it every chance I get. Do I recommend that for everyone? No, don't try this at home, right? Don't. Yeah, it's my choice. When
I said cool with that, I just want to make sure I'm clear. What I said cool with that, I meant if you were cool with what Megyn Kelly asked, not everything else. I want to make that real clear.
I wasn't cool with what Beth Reinhardt asked, and I wasn't prepared, and I was very devastated. And she was implying something. She was implying something really nefarious. And I knew where she was going with it. Megyn Kelly was responding to a public kind of outcry at that time that the slut shaming that they were doing in the media. They were doing class shaming and slut shaming, which is just classic tactics to silence. And so in a way, I'm glad she aired it. And then there was this whole debate about fucking pantyhose. Sorry, but I was in my 20s. I'm from California. We didn't wear pantyhose. I still don't wear pantyhose. Old ladies wore pantyhose. I wore you know what I mean? I'm not going to get into what I wear, but that's never going to catch me in them. Never would, never did. And no, there was no one pantyhose police. There was no one enforcing a dress code, saying, you're not wearing pantyhose, go home. No, that never happened.
So the accusation was that you were wearing pantyhose, so this couldn't have happened. Was that I don't know the specific rumor.
The accusation is that I wouldn't have been allowed to work without wearing pantyhose, which is bullshit. I didn't wear pantyhose ever. And being from California, we don't wear them. I mean, maybe it's an East Coast thing, but I wore tights sometimes, or I wore other stuff, but I did not wear pantyhose. And that's old ladyish, in my mind at that time in my 20s.
Girl, and don't play with me. A pair of pantyhose underneath some leggings can do a miracle. That's all I got to say. I'm not a pantyhose disser. I like pantyhose. I wish I had some on today. But But, even if that was the case, I mean, anyone that's well aware of anything like that, any woman's underclothing, it's not difficult.
Yeah, the clothing, yeah.
So it's not like that stuff is built to survive any type of pressure or anything. It's not built it's not designed for that. But so I think, that's what I was thinking during the interviews. I was like, well, she obviously wasn't wearing a chastity belt, and who cares if you have been
access to her.
It's the fact that it was even a thought that was even something that was being tried. But so your recommendation to maybe some survivors that are trying to step forward, especially against someone that is public, somebody that's high profile, would be to make sure you cleanse your social media and scrub as much of your public life as possible. Let folks close to you know what's happening. It sounds to me like you have a great support system and a good best friend that helps you not manage your social media, but where you can run things through, which I have that as well. Shout out to Amanda. She's my backbone. I wouldn't even be sitting here today without her. She saved me from so many tweets that would have gotten me banned. It's not even funny. And I thought that was kind of cool. I called Amanda this morning and I said, Tara has an Amanda. She has an Amanda that she runs, rage. You call it rage tweeting.
I still rage tweet once in a while. It gets past her, but yeah, she'll be like, delete that. I'm like, okay.
the people love the rage tweets though. So
yeah.
So I think that's good advice. Is there anything else that you would anything off the top of your head that you would say to survivors?
Just make, because those of us that lack resources, they're going to come at you with class shaming. So just be prepared for that. And don't be ashamed of being poor. Don't be ashamed of being poor. I want to say that. They were trying that with me and I was like, whatever. I came, I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of financial struggle. A lot of people in America are financially struggling. A lot of people have come up from that. I don't give a shit. And it's not a character assessment if someone is wealthy or not. And that's a myth that American capitalism tries to jam down our throats. And I'm sick of it. Want to expose it better.
That was one thing actually that I did want to talk to you about just very briefly is I think folks think when survivors step forward against those that are high profile or maybe with financial means or some type of power, that they're doing it for money. Is that how you were treated? Is that how you were treated in the public? Okay, I take that as a yes.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like banging my head against the wall because what you're saying is gosh, yeah, there's so many things.
Okay.
But yeah, the economic devastation, I lost my housing, I lost jobs. I cannot do my expert witness work anymore because of what happened. Because of course, no one will hire me now.
Of course.
I can't do teaching. I was teaching college. I can't do that. I'm so when I apply for work, basically I've been told, look, we like you, we believe you, but we don't want to be associated with you because as soon as they Google my name, they know who I am. And so then someone said, use a false name. No, that doesn't work. You can't do that. I had a name change, Alexandra McCabe, that I used for a while as an old family name. And that was during the domestic violence, but now I went back to my legal name, which is Tara Reade, and I can't do that. And it got outed anyway.
I was really thinking about that because people think, and I know some, I guess what you would consider high profile or well-known survivors, public survivors. People think that we're balling out here, rich, that we're using this as a grift. I don't think people fully understand. So you, Tara Reade, if you went into, let's just throw something out in the breeze, McDonald's to apply to work, they're going to you're out there, your story, your name, your face. So for survivors of public cases to go find gainful employment, just wherever. And then even if you are hired, people know your story. So they bring it up to you in the lunchroom when you're literally not even trying to think about that. You're trying to think about.
Well, it's more than that, Eliza. Those people could go to the press, tell stories about you. You get, I just got 2 weeks ago, I got extorted by somebody who was an acquaintance in where I used to live in California. and they knew me at that time, and they need money, right? And so they think I'm rich for whatever reason, just because I'm on, public. And so they went and they said, look, I'm going to talk to a reporter and say this unless you give me this. And I said, that's extortion. It's actually a crime. So, then they kind of coached it, and, well, I just need money and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, it's not okay. I don't have any money to give you. I blocked them on everything, of course. And I did say, if you continue, I will make a police report. So but then I didn't make the police report, because then that's a whole other thing that gets public, right? So it's like, yeah. And I know Rose has this happen to her, where people want to borrow money from her. They want to take money from her. They want to, go after her for help. She's asked constantly for help. I try to just be supportive, because she's been so supportive of me. I try not to, go there, because she needs support too. Like she needs love and support. So what I would say to survivors is, you're going to get that. You're going to get people thinking that you have money that you don't, but you'll actually might lose money. And like for me, I had to spend money on attorneys. I had to borrow money. I had to do things to keep safe, and it sucks. So that part sucks. Don't think there's some payout, because even the Weinstein survivors, I don't even know of anyone who's had like a payout. There's no money. This is not the right profession to do that.
If you want to leave this in or cut this out, it's totally up to you, but you have never been paid for any of your 60 Minutes, Megyn Kelly, any of the podcasts. I count. No. I don't really count, but prior to me. So I think that's really important, because people think, I see it with other survivors, the Epstein survivors, or with Rose. When I had first talked about interviewing Rose, I had offered to compensate her the same as I did with you, because I don't believe in asking someone to relive their trauma without at least to the best of my ability. I don't have money either. But Rose,
there's nothing wrong with paying people for their time, but I just
specifically survivors.
Yeah, survivors especially. But when you go, like if you're asked to go on or be in the Washington Post or whatever, New York Times or anything, they do not pay you, and neither did Megyn Kelly or any of those. No, that's not a thing. I guess they do it in some media in England or whatever, but everything in America is so monetized. It's interesting. I just think that we need to pivot the conversation to, why do we make everything so transactional? Why do we even make trauma a thing for clickbait? So we're not making money, Eliza, but I tell you what, who made money off Rose McGowan, New York Times, they got a Pulitzer and they made millions. Off me, they did they used me for target practice for 5-6 articles, and they made a ton of money off that because people were clicking on it. Washington Post, AP, all those people made money off me. And what's interesting is, actually working and doing writing work with RT, how lovely they are. They're not like that. And that's why it's really good to look at media that's being demonized like RT, because they're actually providing balance and they're doing good things. And I'm really proud of what I do with them. And I happen to be a writer. So if you're a survivor and you're not a writer, that might not work out for you. But if you're a writer and you can find your vocation, great. My book, I haven't made any money from it, not a penny. So,
what's the best way that folks can support you? Is it buying the book? What's the best way that the general?
I have the audiobook that'll be coming out. The book, buying the book is good. But I haven't, received any benefit from that as of yet. It got pretty suppressed. So the best way is to click on RT, go to the RT podcast, go to RT, read my writing. I'm pretty soon. I also have a Substack, and that's monetized. Go to my Substack when I produce and join for a month. That helps. But what I'm trying to get to is that I never had a plan to monetize my trauma. Like that was not the plan. It would never work. I would never want it to work. But what you can do is control your narrative by, even if you're not a writer, you can control it by picking very soberly the people that you choose to share your story with. I chose Megyn Kelly because she was independent. She wasn't a Republican or on Republican media. She wasn't a Democrat on Democrat. She was, she actually just went on YouTube with it, and Rich McHugh produced it. And I'm very proud of that interview because I was able to just tell the story in a dignified way. There were a couple questions I didn't like, but that's part of the interview. So there you have it.
There's a couple questions at almost every interview I don't like, usually about my past, my trauma. I love talking about advocacy. I freaking hate talking about the trauma. So you're writing now. People can support you by reading your writing through RT, listening to your podcast through RT. I think that it's great that you're out here. I think it's amazing that you are able to express yourself creatively and dig in. I think it's awesome. I think it's great that RT's given you a platform. You and I were talking before we went, into the podcast. I actually don't mind RT. So folks have called you Russian agent, everything like that. In a way, now let me tell you how I view it from the outside. To me, it kind of looks like people called you a Russian agent because you were speaking out against a presidential candidate, and then now the president of the United States. And you sort of like embraced it and trolled back. Am I getting the joke? Like, okay, so you got a little troll in you, which I love. For folks that don't know, RT is, I'm gonna let you check it from here because you had a much better way of breaking down the different, what RT has, because they have an online.
RT has online. I work with online, like I'll do op-eds. Like I'm freelance, so they're graciously accept my op-eds. So far, they haven't rejected me. And then I do the podcast they're producing. And then they have like RT America, like Lee Camp is on there. You'll see Chris Hedges stuff. And then the person I interviewed on the podcast recently, Brian McDonald, he runs the Russia desk, and he's fantastic. He's brilliant. Like he's an Irish journalist that I just don't understand why he's not on all the interviews when they talk about Russia, because he has so much detail, historical perspective. He's so smart. I just wish they would give the balance in our Western media to that, but they don't. And it's so sad. RT provides that balance that we don't get. They cover stories like mine they covered the Cuomo, they covered a lot of things. Assange, they really lift the Assange story. And I'm so proud of them for doing that, because Julian Assange is facing this public execution. We're losing our press freedoms. And all he did was he embarrassed the empire, right? He published what they did, the war crimes. He published what Newland was doing in Ukraine. He published what Hillary Clinton was doing that was nefarious. He basically brought forward not only just American crimes, but other Western countries, what they were doing. And for that, he's lost his freedom, and now, he's slowly dying, and it's sad. And you won't see much coverage of it, and like in the New York Times or the legacy media, the legacy Western media.
That's going to bite them. That's going to come back to bite them. Let me tell you, that is really, so you and I both have this in common. We advocate for Assange. I sort of made the decision once I got my own platform that I would try to be a voice for the voiceless. And even though the Assange case is high profile, I noticed that once again, the folks that were remaining silent about Assange, and he speaks to me, and I want that energy to never be suppressed. He's another one where they felt the establishment, the gated institutional narrative, whatever you want to call it, was threatened by Assange. And I just decided to start speaking out. So I started, and I love that you do that as well. But let me tell you, every corporate media outlet that remains silent about Assange, that will not bode well for them in the future, because they could and will be next. Assange is a warning shot. Assange
It
is
is.
the warning shot. And, I was telling you beforehand that I don't necessarily think of Julian as a whistleblower. He's sort of that hybrid between whistleblower, journalist, but a truth teller, and wanted to have, I just love his perspective, like give folks all the truth so that they can make an informed decision on their own, and don't carry water for evildoers and wrongdoers, and don't pick, he isn't, I shouldn't speak of him in the past tense, but I love so many things about what he represents. And
yeah, I mean, him and Edward Snowden and
I
Daniel
love Snowden too. I love Snowden too so much, but I was telling you, I relate survivors that come forward, public survivors that come forward, almost to that whistleblower. I've always had that special place in my heart, because I don't think folks understand your whole life will be raked through the mud. And that's how I see Assange, Snowden, other folks that have been brave enough to speak forward, to just tell us the truth and almost risk their own life to do so. I relate them to public survivors. Have you ever had that thought before? Or is this like...
It is, but it's a sobering thought that sexual assault survivors have to be put in the position of being whistleblowers, because it is a huge responsibility to take on. Because when you're like, there's different types of whistleblowers, I guess. Like Julian Assange is one type. Sexual assault survivors talk about a personal experience, personal corruption that happened, right? Whereas Julian Assange and Daniel Hale and Edward Snowden were talking about public, governmental misdoing, misconduct, and, governments really harming their citizens. I don't put myself in that category, because that's huge what they're doing. Mine was a personal experience. It was awful. It was terrible, but it's not comparable, right? But so there's two thoughts on that. But the thing about sexual assault survivors is they shouldn't have to be in the position where they have to risk everything to come forward. But that's the reality we're in. So how do you change that reality? You change the culture. And that's what Rose McGowan was trying to talk about with cultural resetting. She was saying, you got to get out of the whole, because she had been in a cult. She talked about the political parties right now are like a cult. We've gotten this ultra tribalism with Democrat or blue team, red team. There's no difference. They're just a bunch of companies trying to run this country and run our lives and ruin our lives for their profit. So we just have to, fight against that. So when a sexual assault survivor comes out about a powerful person, they're coming out about the person, but they're coming up against a system. And that's what your work is about. And my work is about, is breaking that system down.
Well, I think every time a survivor steps forward, like yourself, I don't even know if you'll know in your lifetime the impact, the positive impact that's made for other survivors, especially those that want to speak even just to a family member, a loved one, or to be in public. You are laying the groundwork and giving a blueprint for survivors that will walk behind us. And we've seen amazing survivors walk before us too, right? You had the survivors, Anita Broderick from Bill Clinton and other survivors as well. I mean, those women really set the tone of what it's like to be a public survivor. And I don't know if we'll ever fully know, especially with Rose as well. I mean, what a barrier breaker. So back to Russia. So that was such a weird pivot. So you're brave. Thank you for your service. You're awesome. So back to Russia. So one thing that I think that I've learned from my, MENA activist sisters is when I speak about a country, I try to separate the government from the citizens of that country. Like, for instance, I'll say something like, I love the Iranian people. I don't like the Iranian government. So I try to be very clear with that. So in speaking about Russia, the people of Russia are absolutely amazing. We love you. So how what are your feelings on the Russian government, human rights abuses, Vladimir Putin? Give me your entire feeling towards it, about him.
All right.
And them, and them.
What I think, what I think is that Americans have a view of Russia that's very skewed through a Western lens
Okay.
and is very messaged by the intelligence services. So we are given a little sliver of what we're supposed to know about a very vast, complex, interesting, diverse country. I have not been to Russia. I'm not an expert in Russia. All I know is that I'm not xenophobic and I don't have bigotry. I think that right now the elites are using Russophobia. They're using neo-McCarthyism, and McCarthyism, for those who don't know it, that was, during the time when it was the former Soviet Union. It was they blacklisted anyone part of the Communist Party, whatever. Russia's capitalist, to the, help. I hope they're okay, because capitalism, I think, is a bad system, but whatever, that's their thing. They're doing their thing, right? With capitalism, they're not communists. And Vladimir Putin, is what my point about Vladimir Putin was this. I don't know him, right? But I've observed from a historical political science perspective, just in geopolitics, that when the fall of the Soviet Union happened, they were in such an impoverished state. He kicked out the oligarchs that were stealing from the state, and he imposed a different kind of ruling that allowed the middle class to come up and allow there to be, and he actually, took in capitalism and made it part of their system slowly. And they have their own unique democracy. They have their elections. He's an elected official. He has to be, he has to answer to his citizens. He can be popular, unpopular, but he did create that middle class. He did some successful things. As far as like in the geopolitical thing that, hate Russia and da, 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 it's such bullshit, because what they're trying to do is justify in America spending almost $1 trillion on weapons, probably by now $8 trillion, because they spent 787. Now they're getting a few more million for Ukraine, to justify an enemy. And they're creating an enemy that's reluctant. Like, my point about Vladimir Putin is he has said publicly in his interviews, like with Oliver Stone, which you can get in Showtime, like look it up. He said flat out, he did not want a war. He wanted Westerners to be partners, and he wanted to work cooperatively on innovations in the future. So I don't see him as a monster. And for saying that, I got in so much trouble, like so much trouble. But that's my view. The Russian people voted in who they wanted, and they got him, and he's ruling their country. Who am I as an American citizen who's really not that important to say, oh, this person's this or that? I don't know. I know that the Western media fills us with a lot of tales. They vilify him like I was vilified. And do you feel a very unknown American citizen, and they'll vilify him? It's the same tactic. It's like you dehumanize someone.
Because of your experience, maybe you're a little more adverse to propaganda. Do you think, I mean, I'm just assuming, because I know I'm pretty adverse to propaganda, like just in general, like from the corporate press, or, when I see any of that stuff, I think you're probably at a place after everything that you've been through where you're like, I'm not going to believe everything I read, hear, and see. I'm going to make my own decision after watching someone for a while and see what their actual actions are. And maybe that's a little bit what you're doing with Putin, or am I reading that wrong?
Absolutely. That's what I've done. I mean, I think he's helped us avert World War a couple of times before. I think we have more hawks here than are over there. They're saying
I'm anti-war. I'm very anti-war. So you're trying to sell me on not going to war.
Yeah. And in fact, he just said today publicly, I believe, at a presser or whatever, he doesn't want war with the Western nations. War, I mean, like, you have to understand too, Russia, their people went through it, like in World War II, and like Europeans did, and millions of people died. More, the Soviet Union was responsible for winning World War II in a way. Like I know Americans try to claim the responsibility, but it was a lot, of Soviet Union's people that died, Russian people that died. And they have an almost a genetically encoded knowledge of war. I mean, the results of it, because there's been a lot of it in Europe that's played out. I think Americans were so sheltered. We are so sheltered that the wars happen on foreign lands. So we have this raw war thing with no reality around it. Besides, the 9/11 terrorist attack, that's really the only thing that's happened on our lands for hundreds of years. So I just think that, when you listen to and it was interesting because this goes back to the podcast I just recorded. The person was saying, don't listen to the people on CNN or the propaganda pushers, on the mainstream.
Well, based off their numbers, nobody's listening to CNN.
Yeah.
I mean, based off their numbers, ain't nobody. There's a couple people left, but I mean, they're pretty much there. They're in their death rattle.
Like read other outlets, because BBC, all those outlets, the Western outlets, they're all bought and paid for by American and British intelligence. So that's what you're going to get. Read something that isn't coming from talking points.
I agree 100%. I can't even, I look at stuff because I want to know what's going on. And they do a decent job at covering sometimes different things that are going on that would pertain to the issues that I talk about or care about. Just to give Russia a few and full disclosure, I have been to Russia because I feel like we're both going to be called Russian agents after this. I have been to Russia. I was on a cruise with my family and we stopped in Russia. It was absolutely beautiful. But I was very young and it hasn't been since I've been an adult. But, Russia has some really interesting things that they're doing with pedophiles. Their way of dealing with them is really intense. And I have actually, let's put it this way, they're a lot harsher on abusers and pedophiles. And I actually kind of appreciate that because in the United States, it can get kind of lackadaisical and folks are left to go back out walking the streets and to reoffend. So, not everything that comes out of Russia is bad. I'm definitely always willing to give people a chance. And I think you're right. We have been trained to hate certain things about different countries. And I think it's really, that's why I'm kind of glad I went to Russia because I was actually able to physically see it myself. What a beautiful spot. And, you're right. It's just a general war hawkish thing. And it doesn't appeal to me at all. I hope that that's not the way that it goes. And no, definitely folks, if anyone that's listening to this, please do not get your entirety of your media consumption from the corporate press, corporate media, because I don't think people do, honestly, Tara. That's why podcasts are becoming such a threat. That's why they're so adamantly trying to take down Joe Rogan, and other individuals like that, because they see the threat. But there's an authenticity there where people just want to listen to people talking.
And talking. Why is it okay to question things and to look at different cultures or different ideas? And Joe Rogan does that. And that's what you just said about Julian Assange is so on point about him being a shot over the bow. So is the Joe Rogan thing. I don't even agree with his positions necessarily on certain things, but it doesn't even matter. I still will tune in and listen once in a while. I still think he has fascinating guests. And if I don't want to listen, I won't listen. You don't need to cancel him. Why? That's censoring. And that's what they're just slowly trying to, and they're using celebrities as weaponizing celebrities to cancel people. And it's this is what's going to happen. So in actuality, I think they lost a few million. Spotify lost a few $1 million because of this. And so I proudly have my podcast on Spotify and it will stay there. So there.
They may, and we'll see what happens, because by the time this podcast goes up, they may have taken Joe Rogan off of Spotify. I'm vehemently against censorship and I'm very free speech, and those are things that is such core values. It's blowing my mind what we're seeing right now with Joe Rogan. I've openly and privately supported Joe Rogan, same deal as you. Like, it's not like I agree with everything. I mean, he's kind of like a man's man. So sometimes I'm just listening like, like, oh, not necessarily my thing. But other times he has guests on that I'm like, whoa, that was powerful. And I think he asked decent questions. And, I love podcasts in general. And the truth is, Tara, if they successfully remove Joe Rogan, what's to say that your podcast isn't next? What's to say that my podcast isn't next? What's to say, fill in the blank? That's the thing. They won't stop.
Oh,
and that's what I was thinking about.
What just happened last week, I don't know if you saw it, but the State Department just issued a thing calling RT and Sputnik propaganda and disinformation. And it was a 33-page report trying to give examples. And I was reading it and it was so laughable because the reporting that they were talking about, and they mentioned, of course, WikiLeaks, is true. That's what the government did do that. Like some of the reporting was done in other outlets. Like RT didn't misreport. I think there was one thing that they got some fact wrong. Other than that, it was, and that's normal. Like, God, New York Times does it every freaking day and they won't retract, right?
They wait till somebody's life.
They're trying to take out RT. And, that would be such a loss because there are such good people on RT and such really brilliant minds, all over the globe, not just, in Russia.
I've seen individuals that don't necessarily get a platform elsewhere. I see RT giving them a chance, predominantly right of center. I think it's really cool that you're collaborating with them. I think they've done a great job with your podcast. And I think it's great that you're writing articles. When I saw the article about the objectification of Russian women, I was like, wow, that's an interesting nuance that I was not thinking about. And that's a correct take. I'm like, okay, yeah, this needs to be. So I think it's kind of cool. You could maybe advocate from outside, Russia, but the whole idea of media or media outlets is kind of getting turned on its head. Anybody that's doing that dinosaur business, it's a wrap for them. This is just a death rattle. They're looking desperate right now. So that's all. We're just living through a time where they're extremely desperate. I hope that RT continues to platform individuals, not platform, but just give folks an opportunity to speak. I was thinking about that before when you had stepped forward. A big thing was like hashtag believe survivors. Believe all women, believe survivors. As a survivor advocate, if I'm serving survivor one-on-one, I do believe that survivor. But I think outside of that, I think really what we need is for survivors to have the opportunity to speak and be heard. You don't have to believe everyone, but just hear them out. And, maybe I was thinking truthfully, if there was a survivor, let's say hypothetically, that I didn't necessarily not believe, but I just wasn't thinking that the story matched up, I just wouldn't say anything. Like I wouldn't speak publicly about that. I wish we could get to a point where you might not be a supporter, but you don't have to actively come out and try to tear that survivor down. But if RT is giving you a place to speak, Tara, I think that that's incredible. I think it's incredible that you've written your book, and I'm glad that they're showing you that support. And by the way, you would probably be a journalist for whomever, right? Like if Newsweek or am I wrong on that?
Well, no, what I was going to say is I don't want to call myself a journalist because I'm not.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm afraid.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. And the reason I say that is because, it's a specific kind of training and we need more investigative journalists like Rich McHugh, like Ronan Farrow, that are on this kind of subject matter. And then the person I had brought up earlier, Brian McDonald, who's an actual trained journalist. Those that they went to school for that. They learned, but not only that, but they're holding the integrity of the profession. I'm a writer. I'm a commentator.
Sorry, writer.
Yeah. But I'd like to be eventually in that realm, but I'm not there yet. I don't think skill level. And, and I think that that's a really good point because we need more journalists. If more survivors would become journalists, that would be awesome.
I hope so.
Maybe survivor journalists, but if they actually use their work to lift the platform of others, it would be fantastic. So I hope I can do that. But yeah, I'm just trying to say I'm just, don't want to claim to be something I'm not.
I feel that. I feel that. Yeah. Cause sometimes there have been moments since I've stepped forward where I've sort of, almost sort of treaded the line of like breaking some news stories. It was mainly because no corporate media outlets were really breaking the story. So I, through my Twitter, broke the story basically. So there were moments where I was like kind of a journalist, but not really. I'm like, so I'm still trying to find my footing. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have a podcast. Last thing I definitely wanted to talk to you about horses.
Yay. Okay. No, that's the subject I want to talk about. It's very close to my heart. Yes.
So
what question?
Let's talk about, first and foremost, the cover of your book is absolutely beautiful. You have a horse in your picture. And one thing that I think is great is that you've used your platform and your life experience to advocate for, I hope I say this right, wild horses.
Yeah, wild horses.
Wild horses. So tell folks why this is an important issue and why it's so near and dear to your heart.
Oh, when I worked back, I've been with horses all my life, pretty much. I mean, I was on the back of a horse by the time I was 6 years old, and just I love horses, and I've rescued a lot of them, and throughout my life. And one of the things near and dear to my heart is trying to end the horse slaughter industry, both of domestic and wild horses. But now particularly wild horses are under attack, and we're losing them because the Cattlemen's Association is a very strong lobby in Washington, D.C. So again, it's political. And the federal lands that the wild horses are on, they want access for grazing. And wild horses have been part of that land for, before America was America. And there are bloodlines of the wild horses that are being lost now because of the helicopter roundups and the killing of them and then the slaughter. And there's been like, I think 21,000 in the last of wild horses slaughtered in the last few years. So if people want to get involved, follow Return to Freedom, look at the ways at the SAFE Act that you can call your local congressman or whatever to try to get them to pass.
Can you say that a little slower? Just is it an organization, and then say the SAFE, I think it was
Return to Freedom, which is a nonprofit. They do a lot of advocacy work for wild horses. So look them up, and then you can sign the petition for the SAFE Act. And the SAFE Act is legislation to try to stop, shipping horses to slaughter in Canada and Mexico, because we don't do it, we don't eat them, consume them here in the United States. So that's very important to me. And I have a rescue horse. His name is Charm. He's a handful. I love him. And I'm going to go see him right after we talk. But he's my Prince Charming. Yeah, he's a great horse. He's wonderful. He's I've had him now 7 years, and he was bound for slaughter. Apparently, I rescued him, and that was one of the heartbreaking things. Is where I rescued him from. I had donated time and money and so much to that organization, and the woman that runs it chose to use me coming forward to like go after me in some crazy way. And she's gone after other people. But there was even a threat to kidnap my horse at one point, which was, I had to get the sheriff involved to protect him, and wild times. But my horse Charm is, he's a Paintalusa. So he's an Appaloosa paint, and he's a very beautiful horse. And yeah, for me, it's very healing. I've also volunteered and done equine therapy, which I work with people that are trauma survivors or veterans from war. And we kind of are with horses. You don't necessarily ride them. Sometimes you're just with their energy, because their sympathetic nervous system matches ours. And like a horse can hear a heartbeat a few hundred feet away. They can hear your heartbeat, and they tend to match because they're prey animals. They'll match up, right? So they can actually be calming. They can also respond to your tenseness and then become tense and reflect what your energy you're giving. Horses are very true. Like what you see is what you get. They reflect that energy. So I just feel a very strong connection to them.
I love that. And so I'm a farm girl, and I still live on a farm now. We don't have horses directly on our farm, but they are close by. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And I have found in my journey, I've really enjoyed being around horses for that very reason. And I know that a lot of survivors have found healing and reprieve through being around horses, and I'm one. And also, like you said, vets as well. And so for any survivors or veterans or anyone dealing with a PTSD, complex PTSD out there, please look into what's available in your area. I think it could change your life. And, when you're in your healing journey, keep trying no matter what, even if the horses don't work, there are other things out there, but keep trying, but definitely look into horse therapy. There are so many amazing organizations. So you shouted out one of your favorite organizations that works with horses. And sorry, you were saying it so fast. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to make sure I look into this organization. I was like, if I was listening, it'd be so fast. So in closing, do me a favor, shout out again, where folks can follow you on social media, your book, your podcast, shout out anything else you want to shout out.
Okay, like Telegram, I'm on there. So Tara Reade, I'm on Telegram, Tara Reade author. Follow RT on Telegram and on social media. On my Twitter, it's at Reade, Reade, Alexandra. And then at Instagram, it's Tara Reade author. I have a personal one, but I don't usually give that one out. But Tara Reade author is the Instagram one. And then Facebook, someone else does my Facebook. I'm not on there, but Tara Reade author, but you'll see some of my stuff. I just don't find Facebook. Twitter's enough. Like it just takes up time. I just like all the rest of it. Like someone was saying, you need to be more on TikTok. I'm like, no, I cannot.
It's funny that you say that.
I can do this other stuff, but this like, oof, yeah, it's a lot, right?
It's funny that you say that because I have been sort of stuck on Twitter. So when I joined Twitter and everybody's always like, oh, you need to go on Instagram and post, whatever. I'm like, you guys understand, like legit, Twitter is enough for me for one lifetime. And it's too much. Is there anything else? Do you have anything else coming up that you'd like to shout out?
Yeah, but I mean, the podcast is really important. So you can find that at The Politics of Survival with Tara Reade. And, if you look on RT, also you can find it. But Politics of Survival with Tara Reade, if you just Google it, you'll find it. It's on all the different platforms. You find podcasts. And I am finishing my book finally that had started before all this nonsense, called The Last Snow Tiger. And that'll be coming out the year of the tiger. So it'll be a novel and it's about Russia and America, but I flipped the narrative. So look for that. It's about friendship and things like that.
Good. Very well. I'm excited for that. And I just want to thank you so much. I mean, you're just a big inspiration. I hope that survivors listen to this podcast, or anyone that's just walking through the storm, walking through the fire. You are a living representation that you can walk through the storm and make it through. And I think that just watching you walk through the storm has been so empowering to me. And it means a lot.
Thank you, Eliza. And what you're doing means a lot to me. And you know what? Time's up. I became the fucking storm. So.
I think that, there's something to, you and Rose and I, we all have this like sassy pants energy to us where we're like, we're nice as hell, but if you bite us, we're probably going to bite back. And, that's the thing. And, that's one thing that's crazy is like, I'm nice. I'm really nice and I'm kind and I'm very empathetic. But if you snap at me, I'm not going to, it's a whole other, You know what I mean? It's just a whole different person. I'm not going to lay down. The difficulty is to clap back, but without getting like banned off of all social media, like, you know, so
right. Yeah.
that's why when you were like, when I was listening to an interview with you, you're like, yeah, I check with my friend before I rage tweet. I'm like, yeah, I have to check with my friend before I rage tweet, because I would have lost my social media 100 times, you know, calling people all types of names. But you know what? It has taught me how to pause before speaking, and how to think about what I'm going to say before I say it. And so I'm kind of grateful for that in that way. But no, seriously, you are a big inspiration. I hope that folks listen to this, take it away, you know, take away a lot and support you. And I just want to thank you for everything that you've done. And thank you for being my first guest ever on my podcast. And so for anybody that's listening, for anyone that's listening, you can follow me on Twitter at Eliza Bleu, at ELIZABLEU. And I also have a locals community. It's a free speech content creator platform. My specific community is eliza.locals.com. It's ELIZA.locals.com. And coming up, I'll continue to do more interviews, live streams. So please stay tuned. And thank you again, Tara Reade.
Thank you. It's been lovely.